All right, so if y'all have a Bible, hold it up in the air. Hold your cell phones up too if you got them. I got a question for y'all. Do y'all believe that every word in this Bible is true? That cover to cover, front to back is God-breathed and true? Do y'all believe that? Can we stand in agreement in that? Okay, go to the table of contents. Everybody there? Find the book of Daniel. Tell me what page number it's on. Turn to 802. That's what mine's on. Okay, so who in here knows the story of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah? Y'all know that story? Y'all know the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? That's that story. That's what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm sorry I talk fast. You just got to listen fast. But that's where we're going to go today. And chances are, if you were in VBS as a little kid, Vacation Bible School, chances are you heard this story. And because it's a good story that we can apply some really day-to-day things from. And I hope that today that we can dig a little deeper in this story, so it's not just a story anymore. So everybody agreed with me that everything was true and right in this Bible. So the stories that we read in this Bible really happened. This is a real history of what happened. And so I want with the eyes of that today, that this story actually happened today, I want to talk about these three men. But before we can really go into these three men, we have to know who they are, where they came from, and what happened, and how did they get to where they were, to where we're going to talk about it. So basically in 605 BC, God allowed King Nebuchadnezzar to go to Jerusalem and besiege it. Basically, God took his hand off of Jerusalem and he allowed King Nebuchadnezzar to come in there to destroy some stuff, take some things, and take some people. So the king brought them back to his kingdom and he made slaves out of them. And then after some time later, the king wanted some young men to come and to serve him, but he didn't want just some, regular old dude. He wanted a specific kind of man. And in Daniel chapter 1, verses 3 through 5, this is what it says. The king ordered Apenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family of nobility, young men without physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them languages and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine that came from the king's table, and there they would be trained for 3 years, and after that they would enter the king's service. So when you think about the kind of men that they were looking for the best of the best men, ones that they could teach a lot to, and that they could actually be useful after the extended time. And so the king would train them for 3 years so that they would be ready for service. You see, the Babylonian rulers, they were trying to brainwash these people. They were trying to make them say, the Babylonian way is right, and every way that you learned before is wrong. And so the Babylonian people even went so far to change their names. So Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, the king changed their names to Belshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So he was literally trying to brainwash everything about these people so that they would forget that. But these four men, they knew what was right. They knew the God, the King of Kings. And so much so that the king even gave them food from his own kitchen. And so the food that was being served to these men went against the law of God. And this is really Old Testament stuff, but God told them in the law what was clean to eat and what was unclean to eat. And so that Daniel and these four men, they only wanted to eat vegetables and water. Eat vegetables, drink water. Sure y'all ate some water, have you? Yeah, no thanks. But the king, Daniel and these three men only ate vegetables and water. And the guard that was over them, he said, no, you're not just going to eat vegetables and drink water, because if you look worse than these other men, my head's on the chopping block. I'm going to be the one responsible for y'all. And they finally convinced the guard, give us 10 days, test us and see. You see, they were trying to stand for God. And so after those 10 days, they looked healthier and more nourished than all the others. And after that, for the next 3 years, the guard only gave them vegetables and water. And once these 3 years was over, this is what happened, and it's in verse 17. These 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. So because these 4 men obeyed God and not broken the Jewish law, God then blessed them in a mighty way to be used to further these kingdoms. Once it was all said and done, these 4 men were wiser, they were stronger, they were mightier than all the other ones. And when the king would go to consult these 3 men about a problem that was going on, he found them 10 times more capable than all of his enchanters and all of his musicians. So basically, God blessed them for taking a stand. And so now we know who these men are. We know how they got into the kingdom. They're Israelite men that the king tried to brainwash, and they were forced into the service of the king, but they were there to do mighty works of the King of Kings. And so now let's roll to Daniel chapter 3. Now we know who they are. You're there? Say I'm there. All right. King Nebuchadnezzar, starting in verse 1, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image that had been set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then a herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and people of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that the king Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into the blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all nations and the people of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that the king Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So King Nebuchadnezzar sets up this huge statue and made out of gold, and 60 cubits tall and 6 cubits wide. In today's terms, is 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. You can imagine this ginormous statue made out of gold, and that the king told everybody, it doesn't matter who you were, it doesn't matter what religion you were in, it doesn't matter what language you spoke, you will bow down and worship it, or you will be thrown into the blazing furnace. You know, you can imagine the people of that day. You think, oh, that's all I got to do? I don't want to die. I don't want to get burned. All right, I'll worship it. You know, they were threatened from the king. And so they obeyed the king. They said, if you don't bow down, the consequences will be thrown into the furnace. So that the stage is set. The king had placed his bet. They said, this is what you are to do. And so let's go to verse 8 now. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said, King Nebuchadnezzar, may the king live forever. Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship it be thrown into the blazing furnace. But there are some Jews among you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold that you have set up. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is this true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I have set up? Now you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music. If you are ready to fall down and worship the image I have made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? So what's going on here is some of the king's astrologers went to the king and tattletaled on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They refused to bow down a statue that was built by man because they knew the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the creator of everything. They knew that if they bowed down and worshiped that, they would go against the God of this earth, the one who named the stars, who calls them out, the creator of the heavens and the earth. That's who they were going to worship. But that made King Nebuchadnezzar mad. So he flew into a rage, and he had these three men brought before them. And he told them, if you don't bow down, we're going to throw you into the furnace. Right there, they could have used some excuses. They could have said, well, all right, just this once. Just this once, I'll bow down because I really don't want to die. I really don't want to get burned. Just this once, I'll bow down. Or they could have said, we'll bow down and we'll worship your idols, but we're not going to become idol worshipers, because we don't want to die. But you see, they refused to bow down because they knew what was at stake. They knew that if they worshiped the idol, then they would be going against God. And then in verse 15, something happens here. King Nebuchadnezzar says, then what God will be able to rescue you from my power? You see, he overestimated his power and underestimated God's power. Let me say that again. You see, he overestimated his power because he thought that he was the king. He thought he had all the power. He thought that nothing could happen to him. And he could kill anybody he wanted to. He could make anybody do whatever he wanted them to do. But he underestimated the power of God. And we're going to see what happens. In verses 16 through 18, the change of tone of this story happens. It says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into a blazing furnace, then the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. These three men stood up to a king that could have had him executed on the spot. You can imagine the scenario of what's going on. King Nebuchadnezzar standing there with these three men in front of him. He said, I'm going to give you another chance. All you got to do is bow down and worship me. And then they said, no. He said, we don't need to defend ourselves before you because we have a God who will defend us. They knew the King of Kings. So whatever happened from this king didn't matter. They knew the God that they served. You see, in verse 17 and 18, they were pressured to worship an idol, and what was at stake was everything that they had. They could have folded to save their own skin, but they stood their ground. They said, the God we serve is able to save us, but even if he doesn't, we won't worship anything else. Don't misunderstand what they said. They didn't say that God will serve us. They said, our God is able to serve us, and if he wants to, he will. But even if he doesn't, we ain't going to serve nothing else. We're going to serve God. They trusted God regardless of the outcome. Said, no matter what, kill us. It doesn't matter. We're not going to bow down and worship you because the God we serve is able to save us. And then 19 through 30, the story plays out. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude towards them changed. He ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent, the furnace so hot, that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took them up, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? They replied, certainly, your majesty. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the 4th looks like a son of God. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their heads singed, and their robes not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent an angel and rescued his servants. They trusted him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except for their own. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned to piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way. The king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to the province of Babylon. So filled with rage, the king had these three men tied up from the strongest soldiers. And little did they know that the ropes that they used to tie up would not be able to hold them. Soldiers carried these three men to their death, and little did they know that they would be the ones dying. The king thought it was finished and he could relax, but little did he know that these three men serve a God who is stronger, wiser, and more powerful than any man. The God that these three men serve has the power over fire and death. The God that these three men served was walking in the fire with them. Come on, y'all! The God that these three men served got in the fire with them. And so, he could have saved them in many ways, but he chose to get in the fire and save them. The ropes were no longer on. The smell of smoke was not on them. Not a hair on their head was singed. The God that these men stood up for got in the fire with them and saved them. The God did not allow them to go through the fire alone, but he got in the fire with them. So what do we draw from this story? Is this just a really cool story? Exactly. We all agreed that everything in this was true at the beginning. The three men were thrown tied up with all of their clothes on, should have died. If he killed the three soldiers, brought them up there, they should have died. But God got in there with them and saved them. So that is a true story. And the second thing is, these men were persecuted for who they were and what they believed in, and yet they still went against the biggest, strongest, and most powerful man of all time, and they stood their ground. They said life or death, no matter what. We're not going to worship any other God. So let's think about that in our lives. God never promised that we would not face fires. God never said that our life would be cake. So in your life, bad things are going to happen. Trials are going to come. Death is inevitable. We're going to have marital problems. But are we going to fold? And are we going to blame God for the bad things that happen? Are we going to say, God, this is a big fire, and I want to give in, God, but no matter what, I'm still going to worship you. And God, I need you to get in that fire with me and walk this fire alone. Maybe you got a temptation in your life that, man, it's just a daily grind. You're up against that temptation every single day. You could fold. You can say, God, I'm facing this fire, and God, I know that you can take this away. I know that you can take this temptation away. But God, even if you don't, I want you to get in that fire with me and walk along with me. So are you willing to stand against the fire? Before you answer that, think about that, because it could cost you friends. If you say no to other things, it could cost you friends, but it could literally cost you your life. There are people in this world who say, are you a Christian? Yes, and they die, but they stood their ground because they said, no matter what, I'm not going to worship anything. I'm going to serve the God we serve. As I was preparing for this sermon, God has a funny way of giving examples in my life. Recently we've had some issues with my wife's car. Some major problems. It's been a struggle for us because I'm a husband and I got 3 kids. We only make so much, and I'm like, man, how are we going to pay for this? How are we going to fix this? Who's going to fix it? We can't always go around in one vehicle because I work one day and the kids go a different way, and Jamie has to go another way. God, I can't fix this. I don't know how you're going to come through with this. But it took me to a point to say, God, I know that you can fix this problem. I know that no matter what, you can make this go away. And I know that you're able to. But God, even if you don't, I'm still going to stand here and worship you. Now, have I been that way the whole way? Absolutely not. But I had to say, it took me to a point to where I had to say, God, no matter what, I'm going to worship you. I'm going to be faithful to you. But God, I can't stand. I need you to get in that fire with me and carry me through this fire. So just because we are in the fire doesn't always mean that God will save us. So sometimes in life we have to go through that fire. God could have saved Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from ever even experiencing the fire. But God allowed them to go through that fire. And God was in there with them. So I want to give everybody an opportunity today. If you don't know who Jesus Christ is, if you don't know the guy who has the authority over death, who has authority over fire, who created the heavens and the earth, don't walk out those double doors today. Come talk to us down here. Let us introduce you to a man that can solve all your problems. And if you are a Christian, you may be in that fire right now. It may be something really hard. It may be marriage. It may be finances. Who knows what that is? But you have a choice. You have a choice to say, God, why are you doing this to me? I don't want to face this fire. It's hard. Or you have the choice to say, God, I know you're able to save me through this fire. But God, even if you don't, I'm still going to worship you. So remember, God is able. But even if he doesn't, don't fold. Take a stand for Christ today. If y'all would, pray with me. Father God, we thank you for this day, God. I don't know what's going on out here. I don't know what fires that these people are in. God, it could be simple as having to go fix a flat tire as soon as they get home. Or something major as your marriage or a recent death, Lord. I don't know. Or temptation, Father. Whatever that is. God, I pray that they would take a stand and they would say, you know what, Satan? Get behind me. The God I serve is able to save me, but even if he doesn't, I'm still going to worship him. And God, if there is somebody here who doesn't know you, I pray that they would come down, Lord, and let us introduce you to him, the God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, who knows the stars by name. Father, let us introduce you to him. Lord, this week, as we face fires, God, may we take a stand. And Lord, it's in your name. Amen.